Japan has held a state funeral for the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Mr. Abe, Japan's longest-serving leader, was shot dead during an election rally in July. But in the last few weeks, opposition to the state funeral has been growing, although thousands have gathered to watch the event. The ceremony began with Abe's ashes carried into the Nippon Budokan Arena next to the Imperial Palace in central Tokyo by his widow, Aki. It was accompanied by music from a military band and the booms of the Honor Guard salute. Inside the hall, a large portrait of Abe was hung over a bank of green, white and yellow flowers. Many world leaders were present, including the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the US Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's now go live to Tokyo, where we can speak to our correspondent Mariko Oi. It is indeed a very grand event, Mariko.
Indeed, Tanya, and I am standing outside Budokan. That's the building behind me with a light green roof. This is basically as close as we could get due to tight security. The event has been taking place inside with some 4,500 guests, including, as you mentioned, 700 overseas visitors and foreign ambassadors to the country. It's been dubbed as funeral diplomacy as the current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida continues to hold meetings with those state leaders who are here. As you said earlier during the service, we saw Akie Abe, his widow, carrying his ashes. We also heard from Mr. Kishida, the current Prime Minister, giving eulogy, as well as another successor of Mr. Abe, Yoshihide Suga. But among the Japanese public, opinions have been really split. Our Tokyo correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes has been speaking to some of them.
Before today, we didn't really know what to expect for today's state funeral for Shinzo Abe. Recent opinion polls here in Japan have suggested at least 60% of Japanese are actually against this state funeral happening. But here we are today outside the venue, and you can see, look at this queue. Police tell us this is at least 3 kilometers long. People here have told me they've been waiting for 1.5 or 2 hours so far, and they've still got a long way to go. Many thousands of people coming out to show their respect, to express their sorrow. People in the line here have told us they loved Shinzo Abe. They wanted to show their gratitude for all the things that he's done for Japan. But equally, not far away from here, there are many thousands of others gathering to express their anger, to protest against the fact that Shinzo Abe is getting this very rare honor of a state funeral. We've now come across town a few kilometers to, this is really the downtown Tokyo business district, and you can see a very different scene here. This is one of 3 big protests that have been organized today by those who are absolutely opposed to Shinzo Abe having a state funeral. They're now going to try and march to the funeral location, but they're not going to get there. The police are going to stop them. These people are opposed to Abe having a state funeral for all sorts of different reasons, but primarily they say it is illegal and unconstitutional. And at $12 million US, it is also extremely expensive.
Well, Tanya, as Rupert mentioned in his report, it really goes to show how polarizing, how divisive Mr. Abe was as the Prime Minister when he was alive, and even after his death, his state funeral continues to divide opinions. I spotted the IOC, the International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach, attending the funeral, and to Mr. Abe's supporters, he brought the Tokyo Olympics back to the Japanese capital. To his critics, it was a complete waste of money. No matter which policy you pick of Mr. Abe, there were supporters who loved him and there were critics who absolutely hated him. And it's been very interesting to see how we've been witnessing that he remains very polarizing even after his death.
And of course, during his leadership, it was a time of very great change within the region, not least the rise of China contributing to that.
Absolutely, and Mr. Abe was a strong believer in changing Japan's pacifist constitution, which Japan has had since the end of the Second World War, which basically means that Japan is not allowed to have an active army. But he was very vocal about needing to increase Japan's defense spending, especially since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February. But he's been talking about that when he was the Prime Minister, and even after he stepped down, he kept talking about it, and you could really really see that his opinions somewhat affected the current administration and the previous administration who succeeded Mr. Abe, which goes to show how influential Mr. Abe was even after he stepped down.